Welcome to the podcast Empire. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking to Rose Davidson, a powerhouse in the podcasting industry. And she is the host and producer of Talking with the Experts. It is a show that has skyrocketed to the top 5% globally, ranked in the top 100 in Australia and the top 20 in New Zealand, with over 500 episodes and years of experience. Rose knows exactly how to leverage podcasting for authority, influence, and monetization. So if you're a woman in business looking to start a podcast to elevate your brand, this episode is packed with insider insights and expert strategies you won't want to miss. Let's dive in.
The Podcast Empire, podcast mastery for women in business.
Rose, welcome to the podcast Empire. You have built an incredibly successfully 5% globally topped podcast. Can you share how podcasting has helped you establish authority and deeply connect with your audience?
Well, yeah, I have to say, Tracy, that I am totally surprised by the whole process. I didn't think that I would even reach that height, and I think it's dedication and commitment to the process. I think having processes in place is vitally important for any podcaster if they're having guests on, and that's been tweaked over the years, but I have received such great feedback from my guests to say that they loved the process. It took out all the guesswork, and they were prepared then to come onto the podcast and be interviewed without any way of or any qualms about what their topic was or what they were going to talk about or how it was going to proceed. So it's all in a nutshell, and they just know everything from A to Z.
The process, and we find ourselves, if you have a process that makes it simple for guests to come on, they feel more relaxed as well. And it just makes a better listening experience for the audience. So I'm so glad that you've really touched on those systems and processes. And what I've also found is that many business owners are really hesitant to start a podcast because they think they need a large audience. And we're talking pre-show about this as well. What would you say to those that feel they're too small to make an impact?
Oh, absolutely. I started in 2020, just after the pandemic. And my thinking at the time was that a lot of bricks and mortar businesses were closing their doors. And I thought if I could talk to other business owners who had online businesses, maybe they could offer some hints and tips and strategies on how bricks and mortar businesses could stay open. So I started with no audience, or I had some Facebook friends. So I just emailed them and said, would you like to come on my podcast? And my first one was on the July 13th, 2020 with Prospetera Vinga. And then I've just grown from there. I started with absolutely nothing. I just used my laptop and the microphone and camera on that. So obviously the quality wasn't as great. But when I could afford to, then I bought a USB camera and a USB microphone. And I just use my desktop computer now, but that's all I use. I don't use any fancy bells and whistles or anything like that. It's very plain, very simple, and you can start with nothing. And it's just so easy, but you don't need an audience. You just don't. You can do it so quite simply.
I love how you touched on your consistency as well, because you've done over 500 episodes, and consistency, it's like the compound effect, isn't it? The small, daily or weekly actions lead to bigger things. Do you think that's a huge part of your success for your podcast as well?
I think it might be. I mean, part of the process that I have for my guests is that they share the episodes. And I think that's fundamentally how I've been able to grow my podcast. I mean, I don't have a lot of subscribers on YouTube. I do have a lot of plays, but I don't have a lot of downloads, because people can download something and then forget to listen. But if they play it straight from the platform, that they've had a listen to that. Success comes with time, and don't expect to be an overnight success. I mean, of course you've got those podcasters that, get thousands or millions of downloads in the first episode, but they've probably got a huge following in the first place. But if you're just starting out, don't expect, great success immediately. It takes time. And it took me, about 2 years before I saw such significant increase in the number of plays that my podcast was getting.
And it's all build it in the air, right? We love that. We love that terminology as entrepreneurs, especially Australian women podcasters, that are leveraging podcasting for our business and lead gen and all the good stuff. But we've got to learn. We just got to hit record and just start. I'm so glad that you shared, the consistency part and not having a large audience. We get so caught up, and it's a bit of a myth. And again, we're talking pre-show about this, about, large numbers of subscribers and large download numbers doesn't always mean that you're making money in your business and generating leads to your business offers, or building your community, or people are opting into your non-profit organization, or whatever it may be, right? They're not getting into your funnels. So they're vanity metrics in some regards. And in other ways, it's a test and measure of your success, and we had such an in-depth conversation pre-show about this. I'd like to go a little bit deeper with you about things related podcasting, and it's all about podcasting and personal branding. You have a great online presence, Rose. It really comes across what you're passionate about, what you stand for, what you won't stand for. And if anybody listening goes and listens to any of Rose's interviews, you will see how much her heart and her passion is into her episodes. And I highly recommend that, and I'm sure Rose will too, that if you're thinking about podcasting, you need to go listen to other people's podcasts to get an idea of what's being done. Now, Rose is a leading expert. So, podcasting isn't just about the content, okay? If you want to go from podcast to profit, it's a marketing and monetization tool. I believe, and I'm sure Rose will agree with me, that every woman should have, who's building a brand, should have podcasting in their marketing toolkit. Rose, what are some of the key ways that podcasters can generate income even when they're just getting started?
Well, I think one of the key areas, Tracy, is that you've got an offer that you can talk about. I mean, you can create your own ads on your own podcast. So whether you do that in pre-roll, mid-roll, or end roll, and that's, start, middle, or finish, you can promote your product or your service. Great way to get your audience engaged with you, and to for them to get a bit more curious about what you have to offer them. And it promotes, might promote them to go to your website or your document that you've got on offer, for that particular episode. I mean, you can grow your podcast in other ways, like getting sponsorship and advertisements, or affiliate marketing, or you can have premium content, but premium content makes a little bit extra work for you, because it means you've got to and a bit more work for your guest as well, because then, you've got to stretch that episode out a bit longer, or get them to send you some more material. So I'm not real keen on premium content and memberships, just for that reason. I think it's just because I'm doing it on my own. I don't have a VA, so everything I do by myself. You can offer courses and coaching. You can do crowdfunding, you can do event hosting, but advertise it on your podcast. Have that really strong call to action.
I like how you said really strong call to action. There are podcasts, especially video podcasts on YouTube, and like for the podcast empire, we've been video podcasting before it was popular since 2020. And I know you've been in the podcast game, since 2020 as well. The pandemic produced a lot of podcasts. Many have gone inactive. There's ones around like yours, that and the podcast empire that are still around and still going strong. But with yours, Rose, when you touched on a strong call to action, we can leverage podcasting as a lead generation tool. And women in business want to use and leverage their podcast to drive traffic and sales to their business offers, right? Get them on the email list with and you touched on this so brilliantly, your PDF or your checklist or your ebook or whatever it is. What strategies do you recommend for converting listeners into clients or customers?
I think it's just that very strong call to action, depending on where you want to place it within your video or your audio. I think that's basically it. And you've got to have a really strong product or service, I think at the right price point. That's very important. Sometimes, advertising the price point can be beneficial. Other times it may be a deterrent to people. But yeah, just having a very strong call to action. I don't do one on mine. I'm a believer that, I don't want to make money out of my podcast. That's not why I started it. So I don't have a call to action on mine at all. My call to action is just people to subscribe or listen, and, get ding the bell on YouTube and get them to get notified when there's other episodes available. But for the business person who wants to use podcast as a leverage towards getting more money, just that call to action is so important. And make sure that it's not salesy. It's got to not be salesy. It's got to be, engaging your audience. And you can only gauge that by getting feedback from your listeners.
Absolutely. I call it the mumble, the little hint, the little side whisper during an episode 2 or 3 times that, will draw the audience in, and it doesn't sound salesy and spammy. We don't want to be sold to, but podcasts in general, the latest statistics have proven that many people that follow a podcast and invest in their brand are more likely to buy from a podcast than on social media. And they're the latest statistics. I can't remember where they come out from. I will try and find that and pop that in the show notes below. But I thought that was very interesting for people who are leveraging podcasting on the monetization side of things. And it's great too, because you're so passionate about creating change in the world and creating communities and movements. And we'll talk more about that during this episode with you as well, because what you're doing is creating networks, which is your net worth, which is creating referrals, which is changing people's perspectives and opinions and creating conversations, right? How many times do we turn up at a party or a barbecue and I personally now hear people talking about podcasts in casual conversation. Have you heard a good podcast? So your podcast is creating conversations, which is what we need to be able to make impact in the world. Now, my next question that I'm burning to ask you, Rose, because I know that you're really established in this area, is we're talking about consistency. And we've touched on that consistency. And that is one of the biggest challenges because life happens, right? Yeah. And I think Dale Carnegie mentioned it the most, the marketing guru. He said, we're talking to a marching army, not a standing parade. So, podcasters meet the listener where they're at. They're driving the kids to school, they're commuting to work, they're walking the dog, they're at the gym, all these wonderful things. They can pause it, go back and listen to it. And that's what's so great about podcasting. when people start a podcast, it's so hard to be consistency. And I want to loop around back to that with you, Rose. What your advice for maintaining a content schedule without feeling overwhelmed?
That can be really challenging, Tracy. I think if you're doing a solo podcast, it's being committed to setting aside that 1 or 2 days a week where you want to sit in front of your microphone and, tell a story or promote, something that's in the social media or in the news, or, talk about your favorite subject. If you're having a guest one, I set 2 days aside each week to interview guests. I only do 3 interviews per day. I just find that any more than that, it's too tiring for me, because I have guests that talk about different topics, and so trying to get my head around different topics each day can be quite challenging for me. But it is that consistency of setting that time aside, blocking out your calendar for those particular days. So my calendar is blocked out for Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then I've got Tuesdays where I do the Healing Through Love podcast as well. I produce that and occasionally host it. And so Tuesdays is blocked out as well. So really, to run my business, I've got Monday and Friday. So the rest of it's just podcasting, or it's some involvement in podcasting, because I, edit the videos and do everything else on the weekends. So I don't really have any time to do anything else. But you've got to have that commitment. You've got to just be committed that you're going to set that particular time down each week to do your podcast. It's really important. And, I was reading a statistic today that 372 people start a podcast and they never finish. They only get to the first 1 or 2 episodes because they just don't have that commitment. And you've got to have that time commitment set aside every single week.
Do you think that's related to the why or the passion behind the podcast as well?
I think it is. I think that, it's easy to start a podcast, as I spoke about earlier. You can just have to start with your phone even, or your laptop. But I think you've got to be very strong in your why you're having your podcast and why you're doing it. What do you want to achieve out of it? Is it because you want to get more people into your business, or is it just a passion that you have that you want to help others? And I think you've got to know why you're doing it, and you've got to be very aligned to the passion and the reasons why you're doing it.
And I think the golden nugget there is you've got to have the passion and the reason behind it. You've got to be aligned, the magic word, aligned, right? I'm a huge advocate of batch creating. I've even got a client that every 6 weeks, she's got 5 children under 10, and her husband works FIFO, fly in and fly out. And she's got crazy timetables with drop off at ballet and soccer and all this crazy life stuff, right? So she books a babysitter for a weekend every 6 weeks, and she books herself into a B&B, takes all of her recording stuff, and she'll have it prepared, creates her list of everything she needs to get recorded. She outsources her editing, and she batch creates in 1 weekend every 6 months. She's prepared, it's all done, and then her crazy, chaotic, all unorganized and organized life can just carry on. And I love that how we can adapt it and find our own way in our own routines to be able to stay consistent, to record our content and get into our genius zone and just get it done, right?
Yeah, good on her for doing that. I think that's brilliant. It's a brilliant idea if you're a solo podcaster. It's not so convenient if you've got guests on, because a lot of guests, come from overseas, and time zone differences are a real challenge. And some of those people are getting up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and while for me it's like the middle of the day, and so I'm refreshed, and they're still half asleep. So yeah,
That
that can
is
be
such a good point, Rose. That is such a good point for guest interviews. And that was leading me into our next question as well. So that we're great minds think alike. I love having guest interviews, and pre-show we're talking about women podcasters in Australia. So we're all kind of on the same time zone, just a couple of hours difference. How do you manage the different time zones for global guests?
Well, I have a set time in my calendar. So I interview from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. On Wednesdays and Thursdays. And so my calendar will not book interviews outside of those hours. So, I'm a little bit stiff in the idea that, if they want to appear on the podcast, then they will make the themselves available, based on their time zone, because I think it's up to them to make the effort to do that, because they're the ones who want to promote their businesses or their product or their service, using my podcast as a ways to do that.
Great
So
point.
that's how I manage. I have sometimes gone outside of that if it's someone who is particularly interesting. But I have noticed that most people are quite happy to, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do it, because, what they have to say is important, and they want to get their voice heard.
That is a really good point. And that's a common question in the podcasting industry as well. I think it's great that you set the boundaries and set the expectations in your times that you're available. And, we go outside of that for exceptional guests, obviously. But I think it's really important for our mental health as well. So we're not in that constant, oh, I've got to get up at, 11 o'clock at night to interview this person because this is the only time they're available. And, I've done that myself, and I don't know if you can relate to this, Rose. I've got up at like 1 o'clock in the morning because I thought this guest was absolutely phenomenal, and I stayed up and I'd done the interview, and I should have researched more, and it just wasn't an impactful interview.
No,
So you
I've
have
had
to
a few of those.
pre-qualify your guests as well, right? What process
Absolutely.
do you use for pre-qualifying your guests?
When they make a booking, there is a form that they have to complete, which asks questions about the title of their topic, what their topic's about, the top 3 things that people will learn from listening to that particular episode, and their bio. And if I'm a bit iffy about their bio or their topic, then I'll do some research. So I'll just Google them and find out a little bit more about them. But normally, I get all the information I need from the form, and I found that having those 3 questions about what the audience will get from the interview, I think that helps me to base questions on what I'm going to ask my guest most often, or the paragraph that they submit on what their topic is about. And so I don't really have to write any questions or formulate any other things to do with that.
They're such great points. And I know that, our audience listening today that's maybe rebranding their podcast or done solo episodes, and now they're thinking of podcast guesting and having guests on, or being a guest on other people's podcasts as well. They're all separate areas, aren't they?
Yeah.
Solo podcasting so different to podcast guesting. What would you say the biggest area of difference is there?
I think if you're a guest, you've got to be prepared. You've got to know what the podcast is about. I mean, I've had guests where they were not prepared at all. So I'd ask them a question, and there's like a 30-second answer. So I'd have to keep thinking of more questions and more questions and more questions. And yet that can be tiring for the host, especially if you've got a number of interviews to do during the day. Also for a guest, they make sure that they've got great audio, so their microphone's working, their camera's working, there's great internet connection. They're quite important. But yeah, doing some research on the podcast you're going to appear on is really, really helpful, I think, so that you know that what you're going to talk about is aligned to what that particular podcast is about. And be yourself, be relaxed, be normal, I guess, if you want, with want of a better word.
What's
Don't put
that?
on
What's
airs
being
and
normal?
graces. Don't use industry standard words. Just be yourself, talk normally. And it's up to the host, I must say, to make the guest feel relaxed. It's not up to the guest to make themselves relaxed. It's up to the host. I mean, hosting can be quite a challenge, but it's up to you. It's like having a guest in your home. You would want them to be relaxed. So it's up to the host to make that guest feel relaxed, feel that they are valued, make them, allow them to feel that what they have to say is important.
I really feel and I hope you felt this on our pre-show chat too. When we have a pre-show chat with our guests, whether we've connected with them on social media or through networking events or whatever it may be, I think it's really important to have that chat before you press record on the episode as well, because it gives an opportunity to ask any questions, to set expectations as a podcast host to a guest. This is what you can expect in today's episode. Some podcast hosts like to send questions to their guests. For some guests, that puts their mind at ease if they're, especially if they're neurodivergent or got OCD. They like to be organised. They like to know exactly what they're going to say. So it creates that diversity and inclusion part of it as well. And I love casual conversation, like two people just having a chat as well, like we're doing today. And I really like how your part of podcasting is passion. And I really want to talk about something that really stood out to me when I connected with you. And you've used podcasting to raise awareness for causes like healing through love. And how can women in business, even if it's a passion project, use their podcast for advocacy and storytelling in a meaningful and impactful way?
That is a long question. I think Healing Through Love started a couple of years before we started podcasting. We hold annual Pamper Days for domestic and family violence survivors, and the podcast sort of grew out of that, where we wanted to get guests on that could provide information for DV survivors to overcome the challenges that they might be facing. So whether they're, at the beginning of that journey, or whether they're in the middle, or whether they're at the end, there's always something that someone else can offer to a survivor that could help them to overcome, whether it's mindset or challenges with not the law so much, because we don't dive into that, but mainly mindset. We get clinicians on basically, and we just want to help DV survivors overcome the challenges of their journey and give them a soft place to land, basically.
I love the messaging and the advocacy and the community impact that healing through love. And I've listened to quite a few episodes. It's a very personal subject to myself as well. And I love how women can listen to healing through love and, like you said, have that soft landing. They're not alone. They can reach out for support. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you do get a chance and you're listening to this episode, we will drop the link to Healing Through Love. If you're experiencing any kind of situation, then I'm sure that if you reach out to Rose, she'll be able to offer additional resources for you, because we're all about impacting communities and showing hope for the future, and changing the trajectory of families for the future to create legacies.
We want to. I think we want to change the narrative around domestic violence. I think the number of families that are impacted by, and I'm going to call it a scourge because it is. I mean, in this day and age, it's something that shouldn't be happening. And a number of deaths so far this year has outstripped this time last year. And I think it is just abhorrent to me that this is happening. And I'm not saying it's just women. DV happens to men as well, and that is even less talked about than violence against women. So I think, on both sides of the coin, there's got to be more advocacy around for both genders, because DV is not gender specific. And so all our Healing Thrive is targeting women. Don't think that we aren't helping men in the same situation.
Absolutely. No, great point. Great point. I really love that messaging. So once again, if you do get a chance to listen to Healing with Love, or maybe even share the link that we will drop into the show notes with somebody who may be experiencing that, it may encourage them to create an exit plan. It may encourage them to speak out and want to do something about their situation as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy.
No, it's something that's very personal to me. So
and me. Charlene and I both are survivors. Until recently, I was going through it, and so it's very close to me, and it's still a bit raw. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. And it's something that sticks with us, but there is healing and hope at the end. And people like you, if it's not for people like you, creating that pathway and giving people a hand up, then the world would be a different place. And that's what really caught my eye. Now, this is the power. I'm bringing this up because this is the power of podcasting. It may just be a passion project. It may be a community initiative. It may be wanting to, have your message of impact. Please, if you're listening to this episode and you're listening to Rose, who is an expert in this space, do you see and feel the impact that podcasting can have on just everyday people's lives? You don't have to be an influencer, a micro influencer. You don't even have to have a channel or a Facebook page, but you can listen to a podcast very easily that can create hope, that can create change, and that can create a better life. I call them sliding door moments, Rose. Do you remember that old movie, Sliding Doors?
Yes.
We're just one decision away from a completely different life. I love your passion. I'll be following intently around that as well. Now, earlier in the episode, we touched on mindset. Mindset is huge. There's so many different virtual spider webs that can come from mindset. What are some of the biggest mindset blocks that you've seen when it comes to people launching a podcast, and how can entrepreneurs overcome them?
Well, I think I'll just take myself for an experience. I didn't have a mindset issue. I just said, let's just do it. I'm the type of person who does something and thinks about the outcome later, and then I'll just work it out. And if it doesn't work, then I'll tweak it until it does work. But for the person who thinks, I don't have a good voice, I don't look good on camera, how am I going to talk to people? My advice to you is just do it. No one cares what you look like, even if you have a face for radio. Get on there anyway. No one cares. The only thing that people are interested in is the audio. The audio has to be like 100%. But don't worry about all the other stuff. You learn. It's a learning experience, and take it as that. No one fails. Failure is just a learning experience to do better. So, even if you get to your first 10 episodes and you think, that doesn't sound so good, well, do something about it. Get a better microphone. If you don't look good on camera, well, don't have a video podcast, just have an audio podcast. But just do it, and the mindset will take care of itself. Just, again, get into that consistency, get into that You're going to just set time aside each time, and the mindset stuff will just take care of itself, because you're all worthy. Everyone is worthy of something. They're all worthy of, getting on with their life and great things to happen to them. I don't necessarily believe in the impact of the universe. I do thank the universe from time to time when good things happen, like yesterday. But I think that really, if we just sit down, we think about our goals, we think about why we want to start a podcast, the mindset stuff will take care of itself. Don't get caught in imposter syndrome. Don't get caught in you're not good enough. Just do it. It's not as hard as what people think it is.
And it's a bit freeing too, isn't it? It's like, there, I've
Oh,
said it, it's out
absolutely.
there, nothing I can do about it. I'm probably going to cry about it for 2 days, but so what? Showing up as our true, authentic selves, it's just so freaking freeing.
Yeah, I found that I can do podcasts. I can, talk to other people on a podcast, but for me to do an individual video on my own, I have this like freeze up and ummings and ahhings, and I think I listen back to it and I think, my God, that just sounds so bad. And then I have to re-record it, and I think, don't worry about it. The ums and ahs, they will leave your vocabulary over time. If you've got a lot of ums and ahs in your process, when you're speaking, don't worry, they'll leave. The more you speak, the better you'll become. So again, in my case, the more I appear on video by myself, the better I'll become. But it's just me stepping over that line, getting out of my comfort zone. And that's another thing, get out of your own way.
Getting out of your own way. Oh, that is the biggest lesson, right? If we want Les Brown, I interviewed Les Brown, and he said the graveyard is the most expensive real estate on earth because that's where our dreams go to die. Oh, dagger to the heart. Oh, doesn't that hit home? Nobody cares. Nobody really cares. You're your worst critic, right? I love,
Absolutely.
love that message you shared, Rose, because we all need a reminder of that definitely. And what kind of message would you like to leave our audience on today?
I think if you have ever thought about doing podcasting, and starting your own podcast, then my advice is just start. Start where you are sitting at that very moment. If you're nervous about starting, do a few test episodes first, and get comfortable with sitting in front of the camera and hearing the sound of your own voice. That's my advice. Just start. Don't worry about all the bells and whistles. Just get on with it, and be brave.
There you go. You heard it yourself. Just get on with it. Be brave. Be brave. I love that. Just start. Now, if you loved this conversation with Rose as much as what I have today, and if you're thinking about starting a podcast but need that extra push to just start, then we've got a bonus for you. You can get instant exclusive access to a bonus episode where Rose shares the importance of raising awareness for causes and how you can use your podcast to do that. So if you're somebody who wants to share that message of impact, you want your voice to be finally heard, then reach out and comment bonus episode and I will send it your way. So let's build your influence, grow your brand, and turn your podcast into a powerful business tool and passion project. Thanks for joining us, Rose, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Podcast Empire. Bye for now.
The Podcast Empire, podcast mastery for women in business.